I'm Harris, 63 years old, and last month I retired from the same company I started working for when I was 21. 42 years of clocking in at 6:45 a.m., rain or shine. I was never the smartest guy in the room, but I showed up, and back then, that meant something. I worked through every cold, every layoff scare, every family vacation I cut short because something came up at the plant. People used to say I was married to my job. I always laughed that off. Turns out, they might have been right. My wife, Linda, used to joke that if the factory ever shut down, I'd have to be buried with my name badge. She's 61, a kind woman, a good mother, and the type who remembers everyone's birthdays, even distant cousins. We had two kids, Daniel, our oldest, and Emma, our youngest. Daniel followed in my footsteps, not into factory work, thank God, but into the habit of staying busy. He's got his own business now, barely sleeps, always talking about hustle culture. Emma, though, she was always more sensitive, more observant. She'd be the one waiting up when I got home late, pretending to still be doing homework just so she could talk to me for 5 minutes before bed. That was years ago. Now they're both grown. Daniel's 35, married with two kids, and Emma's 31, just got promoted at some marketing firm. I don't see them as often as I'd like. That's partly my fault. I thought once I retired, I'd have time to fix that, to show up more, make amends for all those missed dinners and soccer games. But life has a strange way of holding up a mirror when you least expect it. At my retirement party was supposed to be that mirror. A celebration of a man who gave his life to his work and was finally ready to live for himself and for his family. The company threw the event at the country club near town, the one with the white columns and fake marble floors. It was beautiful, really. The kind of place that makes you feel like your years meant something. My coworkers said nice things, shook my hand, gave me a plaque. A few even teared up. I smiled through all of it, grateful but a little numb. When it came time for family speeches, I saw my wife nudge Emma, and she stood up, holding her glass. I remember thinking how grown-up she looked, how confident. She's always had this calm way about her, like she's the only one in the room not pretending. She smiled, looked around, and said, "I just want to make a toast to the man who was always there." Everyone smiled. She paused. Then she added, with a faint smirk, "At work." The room erupted in polite laughter. That awkward kind, when people aren't sure if it's a joke or not. I laughed too. I had to. My wife chuckled softly, shaking her head, and Daniel patted me on the back. Classic Emma. Someone said that I raised my glass, pretending it didn't sting. But it did. It burned. I felt the words sink deeper than I expected, deeper than any joke should. She kept talking, something about how my dedication taught her the value of hard work, how she always knew where to find me. Everyone clapped, and the tension dissolved, but inside I was stuck on those four words. The man who was always there, at work. That night, when the last of the guests left, Linda was glowing. She loves events like that, the kind that make you feel part of something grand. She hugged me and said, "Wasn't that lovely? The kids did so well." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. They did. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about that toast. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, aching kind of way. The kind that makes you replay moments like old songs you can't quite turn off. Maybe she didn't mean it to hurt. Maybe she did. When we got home, Linda went straight to bed. I sat in my recliner, still wearing my suit, holding that silly plaque. "For your dedication and service," it said. 42 years boiled down to one sentence. I stared at the TV for a while, not watching, just listening to the hum of it filling the silence. Then, for reasons I still can't explain, I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and walked out. I told myself I just needed air. But somehow, I ended up in my car, parked in front of the plant. The gates were locked, the lot empty. I sat there, staring at the building I'd given most of my life to, and I realized I didn't know what to do without it. I stayed until the sun came up. That became my routine for a few nights. I'd leave after Linda went to bed and just drive. Sometimes I'd park by the river, sometimes by the factory, sometimes I'd sleep in the car. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed time to adjust. But the truth was, I didn't feel like I belonged at home anymore. One morning, I came back around 6 a.m., thinking I could slip into bed unnoticed. But Linda was in the kitchen, making coffee. She didn't look surprised to see me. "Just tired. Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice gentle. Something like that, I said, hanging up my jacket. She nodded, poured 2 mugs, and slid one toward me. You know, Emma called last night, she said carefully. She feels bad about what she said. Did she tell you that? She told me she didn't mean it that way. I nodded, staring into my coffee. I wanted to believe that. But then Linda added, she said you've always been distant. That maybe this is a chance for you to reconnect. Reconnect? I repeated, a little sharper than I meant to. She looked up. You've been gone a lot, Harris. Even when you were here. I didn't have a response for that. Because she wasn't wrong. The days that followed felt strange, too quiet, too long. Linda filled them with calls and visits from neighbors. Daniel came by once, talked mostly about business. Emma texted occasionally. But there was this invisible distance now, something unspoken that hung in every conversation. Then, a week after the party, Linda posted a photo online, a picture of my empty recliner. I didn't see it right away. A coworker texted me. Everything okay, man? Saw your wife's post. I opened it. There it was. My chair, the dent in the cushion still visible, the blanket draped over the arm. And the caption, please. If you see him, tell him we miss him. Hundreds of comments poured in. Praying for you. Hope he's found. Such a kind man. I stared at it for a long time, my name suddenly turning into a headline. I called her. Why would you post that? She sighed. Because, Harris, you're gone. You may come home to shower and change, but you're not here. I'm just figuring things out, I said quietly. Then figure them out here. With us. I wanted to. God, I did. But something in me couldn't move past that toast, or what it represented. Years of being there for everyone in the wrong way. I thought providing was enough. Turns out, they needed presence, not just paychecks. Still, there was something else beneath that ache. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe resentment. Maybe realization. Or maybe the first spark of something that would change everything that came next. Because a few nights later, while scrolling through the comments under that post, I found something that stopped me cold. Something small, almost hidden, but sharp enough to cut through the fog I'd been living in. And that's where everything started to shift. I must have stared at that Facebook post for hours, reading and rereading every comment. Most were just kind words, neighbors, old coworkers, people I hadn't talked to in years leaving thoughts and prayers. But then, buried halfway down, was a comment from Daniel's wife, Kara. It said, we all warned him to slow down before it was too late. It wasn't cruel on the surface, but something about it hit me like a punch to the chest. Warned him. Warned me about what? Working too hard? Providing for everyone? The house, the college tuition, the loans I co-signed when Daniel wanted to start his business. The comment had 50 likes. Even Emma had reacted with a little sad face. I sat there in my car, in some grocery store parking lot, refreshing the page over and over until my phone battery died. When I got home later that night, Linda was still awake, sitting in the recliner, my recliner. She looked up, startled, like she didn't expect me to come in. I saw your post, I said quietly. She put her phone down, sighing. You didn't answer your calls. What was I supposed to do? People were worried. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. You could have just called the police if you thought I was missing, not post it for everyone to see. She frowned. I didn't think you were missing, Harris. I thought maybe someone would tell you how much you're loved. I looked around the living room, the soft lamplight, the family photos, the home I'd worked my whole life to protect. It felt unfamiliar, like walking into a set that used to be yours but had been recast. You think a Facebook post fixes that? I said. You think that tells me I'm loved? I think it's the only way to reach you lately. That one landed. She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't admit that. So I just said, good night, and went upstairs. Over the next few weeks, things started unraveling in quiet, invisible ways. It was like the air in our house had shifted, a constant tension humming underneath everything. Linda was polite, almost too polite. Daniel stopped calling altogether. Emma texted occasionally, but always short, stiff messages like, hope you're doing okay, or Mom said you were out again. I tried to fill my days with projects. Fixed the shed door, organized the garage, even started restoring an old lawnmower I found on Marketplace. But no matter what I did, there was this silence that followed me around, a reminder that retirement wasn't freedom. It was exile. Then one Sunday, Linda told me the kids were coming for dinner. Family night, she said with forced cheer that I wanted to believe it was genuine. I really did. So I got dressed up, wore one of my old work shirts that still smelled faintly of machine oil. There was something comforting about it, like armor. When they arrived, everything felt normal for about 10 minutes. Daniel came in loud and confident, like he owned the place. Emma hugged me briefly, smiling that polite kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Dinner started out fine. Small talk about work, the grandkids, the weather. I was quiet, just listening, grateful to have everyone under one roof. Then Daniel cleared his throat and said, "So, Dad, we wanted to talk to you about something." I set my fork down. "Oh." He looked at Linda, then back at me. "We've been talking, me, Emma, and Mom, and we think it might be time for you to, downsize a bit." I blinked. "Downsize?" "Yeah," Emma said softly. "The house is a lot for you two now, and with your retirement, maybe it's time to think about selling and moving somewhere smaller. Easier to manage." I felt the room tilt a little. "This house is paid off," I said slowly. "I built that shed, laid that patio with my own hands. Why would I sell it?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Because, Dad, you're not exactly in great shape to keep up with it anymore. And honestly, it'd be nice to have you closer to us. Maybe even use some of the money to help Emma out. She's thinking about buying a place." There it was. The real reason that I looked at Emma. She didn't meet my eyes. Linda jumped in, her tone soft, almost rehearsed. "No one's trying to take anything from you, Harris. We're just thinking ahead." "Thinking ahead," I repeated. "You mean planning my exit?" Daniel sighed. "Come on, Dad. Don't make this dramatic. You've been sleeping in your car half the time. You clearly don't want to be here." The words hit me so hard I actually laughed. "I don't want to be here? You think that's what this is about?" Daniel shrugged. "I think you've been checked out for a while. And honestly, Mom deserves some peace." Linda's face tightened, but she didn't correct him. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. I spent 40 years making sure this family never had to worry about bills, roofs, or meals. 40 years of missing birthdays, anniversaries, school plays. All for what? So you could sit here and tell me I'm a burden?" Emma flinched, and for a second I saw something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe. But Daniel just crossed his arms. "You're twisting this, Dad. We're trying to help you. You've lost your way." I wanted to yell, to slam the table, to tell them they had no idea what I'd sacrificed. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe exhaustion. Instead, I just nodded. "You're right, son. I have lost my way." Then I walked out. I didn't pack anything. Just grabbed my keys, my wallet, and left. I drove for hours that night, no destination in mind. Just the open road, the hum of the tires, and the dull ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I ended up at a rest stop a few towns over. Slept in the car again, this time without pretending it was temporary. When I woke up, I had 3 missed calls from Linda, 1 from Emma, none from Daniel. I didn't answer any of them. For the next week, I stayed gone. Ate at diners, showered at gas stations, used my pension money sparingly. I wasn't proud of it, but for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. Then, one morning, I stopped at a coffee shop in town. While waiting for my order, I overheard 2 women at the next table talking. "Did you see Linda's post?" one of them said. "Apparently, he's still gone. Poor thing." "Yeah," the other woman said. "She's handling it so well, though. Daniel and Emma have been amazing through all this." My stomach dropped. I checked my phone, went to Facebook again. Linda had posted another update, a photo of her, Daniel, and Emma standing on the front porch. The caption read, "Family is everything." Some people forget that, but we don't. Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments. "Beautiful family. So strong. He doesn't know what he's missing." I scrolled further and saw something that made my hands shake. It was a post from Daniel, a video of him walking through my garage. My tools lined up, my workbench in the background. He was talking about helping Mom clean out some old stuff Dad left behind. "Gonna donate most of it," he said cheerfully to the camera. "No sense keeping all this junk." That's when I saw it. My old set of wrenches, the ones my father gave me before he passed. They were sitting in a box labeled donation. That was the breaking point. All the quiet hurts, the small dismissals, the jokes, the distance, it all funneled into that one moment. I realized then that I hadn't just lost my job, or my routine, or even my sense of purpose. I'd lost my place in the family I thought I'd built. I sat there in that coffee shop, my reflection in the window staring back at me. Tired, unshaven, eyes hollow, and I knew something had to change. Not just for me, but for the version of me they'd buried while I was still alive. So I went back. But not home. Not yet. First, I made a few stops. A visit to an old friend from the plant. A few phone calls to some people who owed me favors. A trip to the bank. Because if my family thought I was done, they were about to find out just how awake I really was. When I left that coffee shop, I wasn't angry in the same way anymore. The sharp edge of betrayal had dulled into something quieter, a heavy, settled kind of hurt that doesn't burn but freezes you from the inside out. I'd spent my entire life fixing broken machines, solving problems, and keeping things running. Now I was the thing that needed fixing, and for once, I couldn't rely on anyone else to do it that I didn't go home. I didn't even go to the town where people still knew my name. I drove 3 hours north to a place called Silver Lake, small, quiet, the kind of town where no one asks questions if you pay cash. I rented a cheap month-to-month room behind a diner. It wasn't much, a twin bed, a flickering light, a leaky faucet, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe without feeling like I was taking up space that didn't belong to me. The first week, I mostly slept. I think my body needed to shut down, to stop moving after 40 years of motion. I'd wake up around 10, wander down to the diner, drink burnt coffee, and watch people come and go, families, couples, kids on bikes. Life kept happening. With or without me. One morning, I overheard the diner owner, Gus, talking to one of his cooks about needing someone to fix a walk-in freezer. It made this awful humming sound that wouldn't quit. I offered to take a look. "You know refrigeration?" he asked skeptically. "I know machines," I said. "It took me an hour to fix it. The problem was just a loose connection and a fan blade jammed with ice." When the hum stopped, Gus grinned like I'd just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. He handed me $50 and said, "You looking for work?" That's how it started. I didn't plan to work again, not after retiring. But fixing things felt good, familiar, real. So I started taking small repair jobs around town. Garage doors, old heaters, air conditioners, leaky pipes. Word got around that Harris, the handyman, could fix just about anything. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose. I'd wake up early again, have coffee with the old guys who gathered outside the diner, and spend my days working with my hands. I'd come home tired, but it was the kind of tired that feels clean, earned, and slowly, something inside me started to thaw. At night, I'd sit outside on the small porch behind the diner, watching the lake shimmer under the streetlights. I'd think about Linda and the kids, about the house, the garage, the tools I'd lost. There was still pain there, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It was more like a scar, ugly, but healing. Every few days, I'd check Facebook just to see if they'd posted anything new. Daniel had stopped filming in the garage, probably because they'd sold or cleared it out. Emma was thriving at work, traveling, posting group photos from events. Linda's posts were all smiles, church gatherings, brunches, garden updates. It was strange seeing my absence look so tidy online, like I'd never been there at all. Then one night, I saw something different. Emma had posted a photo with a long caption. It was a picture of her standing in front of a podium, holding a plaque. "Employee of the Year," it said. She looked radiant. But what got me was the caption, "For my dad, who taught me what dedication really means." For the first time in months, I smiled. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. Maybe recognition, maybe understanding. Still, I didn't reach out. I wasn't ready, and I wasn't sure they were either. A few months went by. I started saving a little money from the repair work, enough to move into a small cabin near the lake. It was run down, but solid. I fixed the wiring, patched the roof, built shelves, and even found an old recliner at a thrift store. Not as nice as the one back home, but it did the job. Life settled into a rhythm. Work, coffee, lake, sleep. Then one afternoon, Gus walked in holding a flyer. "They're shutting down the old paper mill across town," he said. "Auctioning off all the equipment. Figured you might be interested." I wasn't sure why that caught my attention, but something in me stirred. Maybe nostalgia, maybe curiosity. The mill was a smaller version of the factory I'd spent my career in, but seeing the photos online brought back memories I hadn't touched in years. The smell of metal, the sound of gears grinding, the feeling of purpose. I went to the auction that weekend, more out of boredom than anything. Most of the bidders were scrap dealers. But then I saw it. An old lathe, rusted and worn, but still solid. It was the same model I'd trained on back in my 20s. I ran my hand over it, and for a second, it felt like shaking hands with my younger self that I bid on it. Won it for cheap. That night, I brought it back to the cabin, cleaned it up, oiled the gears, replaced a few parts. When I turned it on, the motor hummed perfectly. I stood there for a long time just listening. That sound, steady and familiar, filling the quiet space that had once felt so empty. And that's when the idea hit me that I could start something new. Something that was mine. I began taking on small fabrication jobs for locals, custom metalwork, small repairs, even art pieces. Word spread quickly. Within a few months, I had steady clients and a small workshop going in a rented garage near town. I called it Second Shift. It was a private joke, the name every worker used for their evening grind after their day job, the time they used to build something for themselves. One day, a young guy came by, barely 20, tattoos peeking out of his sleeves, eyes tired in a way that looked too old for his age. "Gus sent me," he said. "Said you might teach me something." I looked him over. "You ever worked a machine before?" He shook his head. "Well," I said, handing him a pair of gloves, "today's a good day to start." Over time, he became like an apprentice, quiet, hardworking, grateful to have someone believe in him. I taught him the basics: precision, patience, pride in doing things right even when no one's watching. It reminded me of training the younger guys back at the plant, except this time, I wasn't bound by quotas or deadlines. I was doing it because I wanted to. There was something healing about that. Passing on what I'd learned, watching someone grow under my guidance. It gave my days meaning again. But no matter how good things got, there was always a shadow hanging over it, the unfinished business with my family. I thought about them often, especially Linda. I wondered if she ever sat in that recliner and thought about me. I wondered if she regretted the post, or if she'd convinced herself it was necessary. One evening, I came home from the shop to find an envelope slipped under my door. No return address, just my name written in neat handwriting I recognized immediately. Inside was a letter. "Harris, I don't know where you are, but I hope you're okay. Things haven't been the same here. The kids mean well, but they don't understand what it's like to build your whole life around something and then have it disappear overnight. Maybe I didn't either, not until now. I'm sorry for how I handled things. I shouldn't have made you feel like you didn't belong. You always did. You still do. Love, Linda." I sat there staring at that letter for a long time. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from the weight of it all. Years of silence, misunderstanding, pride. For the first time in months, I cried. Not the kind of crying that makes noise, but the quiet kind that sneaks up on you. The next morning, I folded the letter neatly, slipped it into my wallet, and went to work. I didn't reach out right away. I wasn't sure what to say or how to start, but I knew I would, eventually, because for the first time since my retirement, I didn't feel lost anymore. I wasn't the man who'd fallen apart. I was someone rebuilding, not for them, not for recognition, but for myself. That night, I locked up the workshop and stepped outside. The air smelled like rain, and the sky had that strange pink glow it gets just before a storm. I watched the first drops fall, hitting the tin roof, soft and steady, and I realized something. I wasn't running anymore. Not from the factory, or my family, or the version of myself I used to be. That I was finally walking towards something. What I didn't know then was that the past, the family, the house, the lies, wasn't done with me yet. Not by a long shot, because a few days later, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in months. Emma's voice came through, shaky but familiar. "Dad," she said quietly, "something's happened. We need you." When I heard Emma's voice on the other end of the line, something inside me froze. It had been nearly 6 months since I'd heard from her, and in that time, I'd imagined 100 different versions of how this moment might go. A hesitant apology, a short call just to check in, maybe even an awkward coffee invitation. But not this. Her tone was strained, shaky, threaded with the kind of fear that doesn't fake easily. "Dad," she said again. I didn't know who else to call. My pulse quickened. "What happened?" "It's Mom," she whispered. "Something's wrong." The air seemed to leave the room. I grabbed my jacket without even realizing it. "Tell me where you are." "Home. She's been acting strange the past few days, dizzy, tired. We took her to urgent care and they ran tests. They said she needs more scans, and—" Emma's voice cracked. "Daniel's handling it." "But Daniel?" I interrupted. "He's there." "Yes, but—" she hesitated. I need you to come, Dad. Please. That word, please, hit harder than anything else. It had been years since any of them had said it to me. I didn't waste another second. I locked up the shop, grabbed the letter from Linda that I still kept in my wallet, and got in the truck. The drive back felt endless. Every familiar road I passed carried ghosts. The school I used to pick them up from, the diner where Linda and I had Sunday breakfasts, the corner where I'd once waited with flowers on our anniversary. It all looked the same, and yet none of it did. When I finally pulled up to the house, the porch light was on. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The house looked smaller than I remembered, almost fragile. My house, the one they'd nearly talked me into selling. I took a breath and went up the steps. Emma opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes were red from crying, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She froze when she saw me, like she half expected a ghost. "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly. She let out a shaky breath. "Dad." Then, without another word, she stepped forward and hugged me. It was quick, awkward, but real. Inside, the house smelled like disinfectant and lavender. Linda's doing, no doubt. The living room looked mostly the same, except for one glaring detail. My recliner was gone. In its place sat a new one, smaller, sleeker, untouched. I couldn't stop my eyes from lingering on that empty space, as though the ghost of the old chair might still be sitting there, waiting for me. Linda was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a blanket over her shoulders. When she looked up, she smiled weakly. "You came." "I did," I said, my throat tight. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken, but she still looked like the woman I married. Strong, steady, dignified even in sickness. "Guess I'm not as tough as I thought," she said, attempting a smile that I pulled up a chair beside her. "What did the doctor say?" "They're still running tests," Emma said, bringing over a glass of water. "They mentioned something about her heart, maybe her kidneys. We'll know more in a few days." I nodded, but inside, something gnawed at me. Daniel wasn't around. No sign of him, his wife, or their kids. For a man who'd always been quick to take charge, his absence felt deliberate. After a while, Linda went to rest, and Emma stayed behind to talk. "I didn't know who else to call," she said again, wringing her hands. "Daniel's been distracted. He's trying to handle Mom's finances, but he's so busy with work." I studied her face. "Finances?" "Yeah. He said he's helping Mom manage her accounts, bills, that kind of thing. He told her she should sign some papers to make it easier in case." She trailed off, swallowing hard. "In case something happens." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Did she sign anything?" Emma frowned. "I don't know. He said he'd handle it. Mom trusts him." "Of course she does," I thought bitterly. Daniel, the golden child, the successful one, the fixer. The same man who wanted me to sell my home for my own good. I didn't say anything to Emma right then. Instead, I helped settle Linda into bed, kissed her forehead, and told her I'd stay the night in the guest room. She smiled faintly, murmured something about how good it was to have me home, and drifted off. Once she was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The house creaked in the familiar ways it always had, but beneath it all, there was something else, a tension that wasn't there before. That's when I saw it. A folder sitting on the counter, labeled estate planning. I opened it. Inside were forms, power of attorney documents, property transfer agreements, all with Linda's signature neatly pinned at the bottom. But one detail stopped me cold. Next to authorized representative, Daniel's name appeared, signed in his unmistakable handwriting. My chest tightened. I flipped through the rest, the house deed, bank account information, even her life insurance. All of it had been consolidated into one folder. Under his control that I sat there for a long time, my jaw locked, the old anger rising again. But this time, it wasn't wild or impulsive. It was cold, precise, focused. When Emma came downstairs later, she found me still sitting there. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked quietly. "More than I wanted to," I said. She frowned. "Dad, what's going on?" I looked at her for a long moment. She'd always been the empathetic one, the one who saw things before anyone said them out loud. "Has Daniel been pressuring your mom to do anything lately? Sign things? Move money around?" Her eyes widened slightly. "I don't know. He's been talking a lot about preparing for the future. He says he just wants to protect her. But he's been weird. Cagey." I nodded slowly. Don't say anything to him yet. I just need a little time to look into something. Emma hesitated. You're not going to start a fight, are you? No, I said, forcing a small smile. Not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the porch light flicker, thinking about every decision I'd made that led to this. Every hour I'd worked, every sacrifice I'd made. Also, my family could be comfortable. And now, my son, the one I'd worked the hardest for, was quietly carving away at what little was left of that legacy. But if he thought the old man he'd dismissed had gone soft, he was about to find out otherwise. The next morning, while Emma took Linda to her appointment, I went into town. I started with the local bank. The manager, a man I'd known for years, greeted me warmly but grew uncomfortable when I mentioned Linda's accounts. I'm afraid I can't disclose. I held up the folder. I just want to know when these were changed. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. About 2 weeks ago, your wife came in with your son. He said you'd retired and wanted him to handle the financial side of things. Everything looked legitimate. I clenched my jaw. Did she seem okay with it? He frowned. Honestly, she looked a little confused. But she signed. I figured they'd discussed it beforehand. When I walked out of that bank, I wasn't angry. I was focused. Every instinct I'd honed from decades of solving problems kicked in. I needed proof, leverage, and a plan. First, I called an old friend, Tom, one of the accountants from the plant who'd retired a few years before me. He was the kind of guy who never forgot a number. Tom, I said, after catching up briefly, I need a favor. Quietly. Anything for you, Harris. What's going on? I explained the situation, the papers, the signatures, the timing. He listened carefully, then said, send me copies of everything. I'll look into whether your son's been moving money around. If he's touched your accounts or your wife's, I'll find it. By that evening, Tom had already called back. You were right to be suspicious, he said. There have been multiple transfers, small ones at first, then bigger. A new joint account under your wife's name and your son's. A few investment withdrawals. Looks like he's siphoning off assets, bit by bit. My stomach twisted. How much? Hard to say yet. But if I were you, I'd act fast. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence. I could feel the pieces locking into place. The story, the motive, the betrayal. That night, when Emma came back with Linda, I made sure to act normal. Helped with dinner. Sat beside Linda while she rested. But in the back of my mind, I was already constructing something. A careful, methodical plan that I wasn't going to yell or confront anyone this time. I wasn't going to let Daniel twist my words or make me look unstable. No, this would be quiet, deliberate, and devastating. I started by making calls to people from my old network at the plant, to a lawyer I'd helped years ago when his furnace broke, to a couple of locals I'd done repair work for who owed me small favors. Slowly, I began building a web, not of revenge, but of readiness. Then, 2 days later, Daniel finally showed up. He walked through the door all confidence and charm, as if nothing had happened. Dad, he said with a grin. Didn't expect to see you here. I smiled back. Well, life's full of surprises. He clapped me on the shoulder. Glad you're here, though. Mom needs us all to work together right now. I nodded. I couldn't agree more. Inside, every muscle in my body was taut, not from anger, but anticipation. Because I knew something Daniel didn't. I wasn't the broken old man from his retirement party anymore. I was the man who'd learned how to rebuild from the ground up, and I was about to dismantle everything he thought he could control. I spent the week before executing my plan moving quietly, almost invisibly. Daniel thought he had the house, the accounts, and even Mom's trust wrapped up neatly. But every move he made had been tracked, every transfer and signature verified with Tom's help, and every ally I had, from old colleagues to bank contacts, was standing by. I didn't need anger to fuel me. I had patience, knowledge, and the element of surprise. That's far more dangerous. IT started with the accounts. Tom and I had gathered enough proof to show that Daniel had been funneling money into his personal accounts under the guise of investments and emergency funds. The sums weren't astronomical, not compared to the lifetime of earnings we'd built, but it was enough to prove intent, and enough to freeze his control immediately. We went to Linda first. I sat with her in the living room, papers neatly arranged, and spoke slowly, calmly. Linda, I need you to look at these, I said. She glanced at them and froze. The handwriting was unmistakable. Daniel's signature on every transaction, every change, every unauthorized withdrawal. He's been moving money without your knowledge. I explained, voice steady. But inside I could feel the energy building, like coiled wire. Linda's face went pale. Why would he? To control you. To control this house. You've trusted him, and he took advantage. She looked down, then back up at me, eyes filled with the mix of realization and betrayal I knew too well. I reached over, taking her hand. You trusted the wrong person, but we're going to fix it. We went to the bank together. Daniel had been careful, but he hadn't anticipated that I had Tom on my side. The paperwork was halted immediately, all transfers frozen. Any funds he'd siphoned off were flagged for return. He'd walked right into a trap of his own making. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting, smug and self-assured. Dad, I can explain. I held up my hand. No, not a word. You'll see the bank. He frowned. The bank? What? They know everything, Daniel. Every unauthorized transaction. Every attempt to manipulate your mother. Everything. They froze the accounts. You won't have access to a dime. For a moment, his face went pale, then red. He tried to argue, but the bank called just then to verify the freezes, and he realized he was powerless. Next came the house. Remember the way he'd pressured me to downsize? That had been his first attempt at control. Now, it was mine to wield. But I didn't evict him. I didn't throw him out. I just quietly changed the locks while he was at work, leaving a spare key only with Linda. She had the final word. When Daniel returned home, he found himself locked out of rooms he thought he owned, unable to access files he thought were hidden from Mom's view, with every corner of control he had over the house now resting on her discretion. The final act came from a place I had kept quiet, my network from the factory and the small business I'd built in Silver Lake. I quietly spread word among Daniel's clients and partners, the people he relied on to keep his image as the responsible, competent son intact. Within days, they started noticing irregularities, unexplained withdrawals, vague excuses, and more importantly, his inability to provide documentation that wasn't traced back to him personally. Trust evaporated faster than water on hot asphalt. Calls went unanswered, partnerships dissolved, contracts paused. He was officially isolated, stripped of both financial and social leverage. Daniel's downfall was quiet but undeniable. He tried to regain control through anger and intimidation, but no one listened anymore. His wife eventually left, citing differences and the stress of financial mismanagement. Emma refused to engage with him, firmly siding with Mom and me. He became a shell of the confident man who had once tried to dictate my life. Through it all, I never yelled. I never got loud. I stayed calm, measured, letting the evidence and the slow, methodical exposure of his schemes do all the work. Every move he'd made to assert dominance over me and my family turned against him. Linda and I rebuilt our home together. We took time to repair the quiet fractures, to talk about what had happened, and to restore trust. Emma returned to regular visits, more present than she had been in years. And for the first time in decades, I felt seen, respected, and necessary in my own house. Not because of work, not because of money, not because of obligation, but because I had finally asserted myself, and the family realized exactly who I was without having to ask. The final domino fell on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Daniel, sitting alone in what had once been his domain, received a certified letter from the bank and an attorney I'd retained. Every misappropriated dollar was frozen pending restitution, and legal guardianship of any joint financial decisions defaulted to Linda. He could not argue. He could not manipulate. He could only accept that he had lost. When he called me that evening, voice strained and low, I listened. He tried to justify, to plead, to twist the story, but I stayed silent. I let the truth, which I had carefully documented and delivered, speak for itself. Finally, he said, almost whispering, I never thought you'd. I didn't need to be thought of, I interrupted calmly. I just needed to act. After that, he stopped calling. He withdrew from the house entirely, leaving us to rebuild our lives on our own terms. Linda and I sat on the porch that night, Emma visiting briefly to drop off the grandkids. We watched the sunset together, calm, quiet, unbroken. I felt the weight of decades lift off my shoulders, replaced with something unfamiliar and exhilarating. Control. Not over others, but over my life, my family, and my own destiny that I had been pushed aside. overlooked, treated like I didn't matter. I had laughed through it, nodded, accepted the polite applause while my soul quietly frayed. But I had survived. I had rebuilt. And when the time came, I had struck with precision, with patience, and with justice that left no ambiguity. That night, I sat in my recliner, the same one I'd reclaimed from the thrift store, polished and steady under me. I poured a cup of coffee, listened to the soft hum of the refrigerator, and watched the last hints of sunlight vanish behind the trees that I realized, with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't known I'd earned, that some victories don't need noise. They don't need drama. They just need the quiet patience of a man who's been underestimated for far too long. And as I leaned back, feeling the soft curve of the cushion beneath me, I whispered softly to myself, just loud enough to hear. I was always here, and now they know it.